Let's go ahead and bring in our next guest a little bit early. I will say it has to be so hard to be a superintendent right now. Dr. Gerald Hill with us here on the MegaCast from the West Bloomfield School District. Dr. Hill, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Ronnie. It's a pleasure to be here, even despite what you just said, the challenges, but it's fun to be here anyway.
Dr. Hill, I do think about you guys when you see the new headlines. You know, first it was close the schools down. No, the schools have to be open by March 1st. And now the CDC is coming out with some new different guidelines. How do you keep it straight?
Well, actually, we have to go beyond the sound bites because the sound bites can be misleading. Like, for example, the director of the Centers for Disease Control says it's safe to have in-person learning. And it is, as long as you follow the CDC guidelines. And then it takes about another 15 minutes or so to explain those guidelines. And so people hear the soundbite, and that's it. And so they put their own interpretation on it. So therein lies a challenge for all public educators in trying to make sure that the public, our public, understands the rules that we're playing by.
Well, because on top of that, it's not only that each district is different, but each school building, each classroom is different. And so when you're trying to look at some of these guidelines and follow them, physically they could be a challenge and not able to do so.
Oh, that's very true, Ronnie. It's much easier to cohort students and accomplish social distancing in a kindergarten through grade 5 school where students are, for the most part, self-contained and they don't change classes and all of that. When you get into a middle school with the changing of classes and a high school in particular, it gets much more challenging to maintain social distancing, and you really can't cohort as effectively in the upper grades.
Oh, but those high school seniors have to be pretty excited, most of them. Some still want to be home in their pajamas, but I know speaking with some of the students, they seem pretty excited to be able to get back to the classroom, even if it's on somewhat of a part-time basis.
Well, I think that's definitely true. I mean, they thrive on interacting with one another. Teenagers, young adults, we're social creatures, and they really thrive on the interaction with not only their peers but with their teachers. And so having the option of even if it's part-time, face-to-face and having that daily interaction with peers and with teachers is so beneficial to students in many ways. And then, of course, we still offer the totally virtual online aspect. In both cases, however, students have a lot more flexibility in schedule, and they're learning how to manage their time and their learning much better than in the past.
And really it's going to help them, I think, make an easier transition to college. Because when you get to college, you know, you're on your own. You need to manage your time and that balance of, you know, the homework and going to classes and the partying. I mean, so this is like, getting them ready for the next phase in life.
Yes, they're having to be making decisions themselves as to what works for them and what doesn't. I think one of the biggest benefits is that the students are taking far greater responsibility for their learning, and they're taking it more seriously. Not all, we still have students that need a lot of guidance and a lot more guidance than they can provide themselves. But that's where the hybrid model has a benefit, because we can still maintain contact with students that need those extra supports. And so, but that transition to college should be a lot smoother. And quite frankly, college right now is pretty much what we're doing in high school. It's not all face-to-face either. So.
Yeah, that's a great example. With that, do you have a breakdown about how many or what percentage of the students have decided to remain online and how many are coming back to the hybrid model?
We have about 25 to 30% of our students who are in Lakers Online, and that's in grades K through 12. And it's fairly consistent. There's probably more Lakers Online students or totally virtual at the higher grade levels than at the lower, but it hangs right around that 25 to 30%. And then in the hybrid model, when we switched from totally online to hybrid at the high school, we had about 65, 70 students who went to Lakers Online because they were still hesitant to have the face-to-face contact. So.
It's hard to try to please everyone because, even outside of a pandemic, everyone learns differently. And now you're trying to juggle all these other avenues to make it work for families with different needs and different learning skills on top of that. So 11 months into this, are you ready for it to be over?
Yeah, 11 months ago. Yeah. No, we've been working hard at changing how we teach and changing how we communicate and adapting. And I give credit to our staff for their resiliency and their innovative ideas. However, to a person, we are looking forward to having more in-person learning. As a matter of fact, as you and I are talking, we're planning for next school year with the assumption that we will have two options. One will be the totally online, and if families are still hesitant, but the other option will be 5 days a week, fully in-person model. And so we're planning that as right now. One of the takeaways that we have from this whole pandemic, however, is that we have learned so much about the importance of choice, that students need more choices. We've learned that, quite frankly, less is more. We don't need to cover everything. If we focus on the more important standards and benchmarks and not try to cover everything, that's important. We've learned how to use technology, and both in the class and remotely, and so how to communicate and collaborate through technology. This format that we are in right now, that teachers are becoming very adept, students are becoming very adept, and so there are a lot of things that we will continue, even though we'll be in a fully face-to-face model, but we'll continue a lot of the strategies that we're employing right now.
Dr. Gerald Hill with us here on the MegaCast. He's the superintendent for the West Bloomfield School District. And with that, can we talk a little bit about the standardized testing? Where do things stand? I know that the federal government just announced that the M-STEP is going to be required. What are the plans with that? And is this really a good time to be giving a test to students?
No, it's not. So the decision the other day that was announced, it was clarified. It's like one of those, let's hear the soundbite, and then, we're going to give M-STEP. Well, not necessarily, because they are offering flexibility to states. They just didn't give a blanket exemption from assessments. And so our state superintendent, Dr. Rice, he is meeting with the Education Department in Washington, D.C., and they're exploring other ways to provide assessments that are maybe there's a more local choice in it, and rather than M-STEP. So M-STEP may still not be the test everybody takes. The challenge is that calendar is creeping up on us, and we're planning to give M-STEP because there's no exemption right now, but there's a possibility that there will be an exemption where you can give some other form of assessment rather than M-STEP. And that form would, in our case, would more than likely be our local, or we have a national NWEA test that we give that is a little more instructionally oriented rather than M-STEP.
And we talked yesterday with Ken Gutman from the Walled Lake School District, who had talked about their own internal assessment practices and keeping up with particularly learning loss in this year because it's been so tough on students and on teachers. So Dr. Hill, in the West Bloomfield School District, you mentioned a couple of potential assessments that are internal or within an organization that the school district's affiliated with. But in process, while we're teaching these students and while the pandemic continues to have a major impact on education, what is the school district doing to maintain some form of assessment or keep an eye on learning loss and how to pick up on that in the next school year and then the coming years for students that are going to continue to be educated in West Bloomfield following the pitfalls of the past year, 2 years in the pandemic?
So I mentioned NWEA, and we utilize that all the time in conjunction with the state required assessments. So we will continue and have continued using that instrument to measure we're basically measuring student growth and how they're growing. You know, this whole concept of learning loss is somewhat of a misnomer. It's learning loss as measured by M-STEP. M-STEP is not the be-all, end-all to learning. And so there are tons of things students are learning, and we talked about some: how to be more responsible, how to be more resilient, how to be more independent, how to make wiser decisions. None of those are reflected on tests. So I don't think we should sell our students short and say they're at a deficit. At a deficit compared to what? I mean, every student in the United States is going through this different kind of learning. And compared to the typical standardized test, yes, there will be lower scores. But does that standardized test really, is it the be-all, end-all? Or do we want life skills? You know, we have the 4 C's in West Bloomfield, and we want students to graduate being able to communicate, being able to collaborate, being able to creatively problem solve, and be contributors of society. None of those are tested by MSTEP. So my contention is that we should really examine this whole, I guess, bias toward assessing students from some standardized assessment, and that's the gold standard. I don't believe it's a gold standard.
Hey, but you bring up a good point, because there has been an argument about the standardized test prior to the pandemic, but there also needs to have a conversation, you know, getting some of these students ready for life, you know, how to balance a checkbook. Some students don't even know there is such a thing as a checkbook, you know, because we don't write checks any longer, but teaching them about finances, teaching them home ec. I one time was at an apartment complex, and there was a college kid who put like laundry soap, his detergent, in the dishwasher because he didn't know how to run a dishwasher. And this is a college student, which then flooded the apartment below him, and fun times. But, you know, so there is an argument about, hey, shouldn't we be getting some of these students ready for life as well as just book smart? So the standardized test maybe isn't the route to go.
I think you're right. We need to have a balance. The key is we need to be accountable for how our students are learning, and we need to be accountable how they're learning the skills and standards that we say they should. But we shouldn't do, what we shouldn't do is be overly zealous and put too much importance upon that. You take some of the leading countries in the world, Finland as an example. Finland does not have an MSTEP test. They depend on their educators to provide the assessments, and their assessments for learning, and they still do standardized tests, and they're always in the top in the world on the standardized tests, but they don't live and die by those. I think we need to have a more fully, a whole student approach to learning. As you said, some of the practical life skills that people need to know and get ready to live outside of schools. And so I look forward to a broader conversation once we end this pandemic of what place do standardized tests have in our system? How can we be accountable and still emphasize practical learning, lifelong learning, and those things you mentioned, how to live successfully?
And so with that too, can we talk about the budget at all? Still navigating that fun thing, huh?
Yes, and it's a little disappointing. We have the federal government through the ESSER funding has allocated $1.6 billion or whatever to the state of Michigan. It's sitting in Lansing. It's been sitting there since it's been allocated because of the political dynamics going on between the governor and the Republican Party who is controlling the legislature. And they still haven't sent that money to the schools. And we are being pressed on the one hand, open, and take care of all the health and safety needs of the students. And on the other hand, they are playing a power game with the governor and withholding the funds, and we still don't have them. And so I think the politicians need to quit being politicians and be statespeople, statesmen, stateswomen, and do what's right by the students of the state of Michigan. It's been disappointing watching that power play going on in Lansing while we're out here in the field delivering educational services, and they're holding a lot of the resources hostage.
That is a great way to put it. And it's almost like you want to welcome them and say, hey, come sit in my shoes for a day. you tried to navigate this world because then maybe they could learn to work together a little bit more, because you as the superintendent and for all the teachers and the parents, you've had to find ways to work together during this pandemic, and holding that money hostage is not going to benefit anyone. But the other side of that argument being that we need to spend the money responsibly because it may not be here when we need it again for that rainy day.
And that's why we have school boards. School boards are duly elected governing bodies, and they should be held accountable for how that money is used. The money from the federal government is just a pass-through through the state. It's not state taxpayer money, it's from the federal government. And so I think they're playing politics with it unnecessarily, especially when we have another governing body, the boards of education across the state, who are totally capable of making decisions that will positively impact their local context.
There are so many different facets to this discussion, and so many worlds that you have to navigate just to try to educate our kids. With that, do you anticipate once this is over, the West Bloomfield School District is going to lose a certain percentage of students because they've either left the district, or maybe they're going to find another model? Or do you think by having that online learning, that's going to attract more people to the district?
I think everybody is a little frustrated right now with the pandemic and all of the mitigation measures that we have put in place, we, society. And they want things the way they used to be. And so there's always, things must be better somewhere else kind of feeling when you're frustrated. The challenge is, though, there aren't many other places that are doing things that much differently. So in terms of student enrollment, we did not lose that many, just nominal amount of students. And so I don't anticipate that enrollment loss due to the pandemic will be an issue. We project continued enrollment loss just by the birth rates that are happening, but not necessarily the pandemic. And because we will have that choice between full-time, in-person, and or Lakers online, I think we'll be able to satisfy the wishes of our residents and our children and families that are enrolled in our school district.
It really is going to be interesting post-pandemic, if we ever get there, how some families are going to choose to remain online, because to me that just seems so far-fetched when they started this. But you think, there have been people that have been learning online for years. Yeah. It just wasn't being done on such a large scale. But for some students, they learn so much better that way.
And I think particularly with the older the student is, I think elementary is the parents that I think are facing the biggest challenge in this whole scenario we're in are families that have more than one child in their elementary age and trying to manage that. And so I think the face-to-face is far more valuable to families with younger children. Whereas if I'm a high school student, I might want some flexibility in my schedule. I might have some other things I want to do. So the online environment may suit my particular circumstances much better. One of the other things that we're exploring is, we have this really early start time at the high school, 7:04 a.m. We're looking at how can we start later and in face-to-face, and maybe have some optional opportunities before the official start of school. So.
Well, and I would think, too, if you could do that hybrid model, or if the students can do online, it also allows for them to look at other opportunities outside of the school, maybe have a part-time job or do an internship that could help them in this next phase of their life, which would be an added benefit to their education as well.
Well, that's a great point. And we do have several internship, mentorship type programs at the high school level. We have a real good program with Henry Ford Health Systems, medical mentorship, not only Henry Ford, but other medical providers in the area. And we have several other opportunities for students to take advantage of the businesses and industries and school districts, wherever they see themselves, and be a mentor, be in a mentor kind of role, and more of an apprentice role, and learn a trade, learn a profession as they're going to school. And that's a highly important aspect of education. So when you do get to college or a trade school, you have some idea of what you're considering.
And there are so many programs right now here in the state of Michigan to try to entice people to go into the trade industry as well. So it could be another avenue to help fill those spots needed in our society. What a great way to get a jump start in life, too.
Oh, it is. And we have this, for too long, we've said that everybody should get a 4-year college degree. And that really isn't the case, because there are some fantastic careers out there that do not require a 4-year college degree. Maybe it's a technical degree. Maybe it's a training at a trade school. We have our CTE programs. We have our Oakland Schools has a great trade program. And the advantage is when you graduate, you don't have ton of debt, and you're making probably more than twice the amount of money a first-year teacher makes when you graduate from college. So there are some good opportunities out in this area.
Yeah, I was astounded at the high price of college. Now, I looked at one point in time just to take a class, and I didn't need the credits, but I was like, whoa, the price of college at the community college has really jumped from back in the day. So when you're talking about debt, some of these students are really coming out of a 4-year degree with huge student debt, and that can take them a long time to pay off. So a lot of things for them to explore. Dr. Hill, we always appreciate your time here with us. Anything we didn't touch on that you want to say before we let you go?
I'm just going to put in a plug for our summer learning opportunities. Tyler mentioned earlier learning loss, and we have a really exciting array of summer opportunities for kindergarten through grade 12 students, and we're calling it Acceleration, EXCEL, and we're going to do thematic types of units from the end of June to mid-July. And they're going to be makers, they're going to be detectives, but they're going to be learning. And we have our typical summer offerings, which we will continue with, but we're putting together some really great learning camps for students. And I encourage families out there to check out our website shortly. We're in the development process right now. You've had Deanna Barish on a few times, I know, and she could actually do a real good job in terms of explaining the opportunities that we're creating for students for learning in the summer. We want to get a jump start on the fall, and that's one way we can do it.
Well, Dr. Hill, that's always good. The students will need it, I think, after this year. Plus, I think they're just going to be so eager to be back around people as well. So we so appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.